A young black woman was asked to give up her VIP seat to an elderly white passenger, and with one firm phone call, the entire cabin crew and all the privileged regulars paid the price. What would you do if someone assumed your place belonged to them, simply because of their age or social standing? On what seemed like an ordinary flight, the composure and courage of this young woman turned an act of arrogance into a lesson in fairness no one in first class could ever forget. Don't look away. This is a story of quiet strength, unexpected turns, and a power shift that will make everyone reflect. The early morning sun flooded JFK International Airport, glinting off the sleek glass walls of the vast departure hall. Amid the surge of hurrying travelers, a young woman moved with both determination and poise, her navy carry-on in hand. Her simple black suit, though unadorned, only amplified the confidence in her gaze. This was Jasmine Carter, 26 years old, her deep brown skin radiant in the dawn light, her eyes alight with resolve. In her hand, she gripped her first-class boarding pass for Seat 1A as if it were the emblem of every ounce of effort she'd poured into getting here. Jasmine paused before the electronic departure board, tracing the flight number 307. The flight that would carry her to Los Angeles to sign the first major international contract of her career. Her heart pounded with a mix of pride and anticipation. Not everyone knew that, just a few years ago, Jasmine had been pulling late shifts as a barista in Brooklyn, studying by day and washing dishes by night, sometimes sleeping in a 10-square-meter room barely big enough for a bed. Every internship application she sent brought a polite refusal or a skeptical glance, because of her skin color, her youth, and the fact that she had no big connections. Those who once laughed at her dreams of becoming a CEO, the ones who insisted success was only for white people, or those with money, age, and prestigious degrees, were now in the past. They didn't know that each rejection had only steeled her resolve. In her mind, she repeated, "I deserve more than this, as long as I never give up." A boarding announcement crackled over the speakers. Jasmine took a final look through her documents, straightened her collar, and inhaled deeply. In her mind, her mother's warm voice echoed, "Jasmine, never let anyone take away the place you deserve. They will find every excuse to hold you back, but only you know how many tears and late nights went into earning that ticket." The first-class cabin appeared before Jasmine like a finish line on the marathon of her youth. She walked in slowly, feeling every gaze, some curious, some dismissive, some puzzled at why a young black woman could be seated among gray suits, expensive watches, and wafts of luxury perfume. But Jasmine didn't care. All the insecurities, the hurts, and the doubts that had once surrounded her had been replaced by pride and determination. She settled into Seat 1A, looked out the window at the endless blue sky ahead, and smiled softly. "Today, I will show them that success has no color, no age, and no one has the right to take it from you except yourself." And so began the flight on which Jasmine Carter, the young woman of a new generation, would redefine what it means to be valued, to be respected, and to demonstrate the power of perseverance. The moment Jasmine leaned back into the plush 1A seat, her breath still carried the flutter of excitement and nerves that come with hitting a new milestone. Outside the window, sunlight poured onto the tarmac at JFK. Inside, first class, the rich aroma of freshly poured Arabica coffee mingled with a hint of luxury perfume, while muffled chatter among a few seasoned business travelers blended with the boarding announcements, creating a serene atmosphere in which Jasmine felt she truly belonged. She pulled out her tablet and carefully scrolled through the unfinished pages of the contract, every detail of her first seven-figure deal coming into sharp focus under her fingertips. If she closed this successfully, Starlink Solutions would earn nationwide recognition, both her dream and a massive responsibility. Yet Jasmine felt an unexpected calm. Deep inside, her confidence was steadily growing, as though every setback, every late night, and every ounce of perseverance had finally paid off. Suddenly, the cabin's ambiance shifted. The click-click of high heels echoed across the polished floor as someone walked in, each step measured but laden with authority. Jasmine opened her eyes and immediately sensed the change in the room's atmosphere, like a cold gust cutting through a sunny day. Two women approached, one tall, sun-kissed blonde, the other shorter, with brown hair and a steely gaze that tracked her companion's every move. They were dressed to impress. Soft fur coats, classic Chanel bags, diamond rings sparkling in the light, embodying wealth, power, and a deep familiarity with this privileged world. The taller woman was Evelyn Stokes, the archetype of America's elite, 55 years old, owner of a chain of fine dining restaurants, and a platinum elite member on this airline, someone who, with a single phone call, could summon any request into reality. Her makeup was flawless, her cheekbones sharp, her lips pressed into a cold, straight line. Evelyn's eyes swept the cabin and lingered longest on seat 1A, where Jasmine sat. In that instant, a flicker of displeasure flashed across her perfectly composed face, even as her lips curved into a polite smile. That gaze felt like scrutiny, judgment, and a hint of contempt all at once. At her side stood Linda Miller, Evelyn's confidant and right hand, known for her discreet but incisive presence. A former investment advisor accustomed to high society cocktail parties, she mastered the art of silence and knew exactly when to stir the pot so her friends' wishes would carry weight. Evelyn smoothed the Hermes scarf at her neck and strode up to 1A, barely bothering to conceal her irritation. She leaned toward Linda, speaking loud enough for Jasmine to hear. They must have made a mistake. 1A should go to a long-time platinum member, not anyone who wanders in here. Linda cast Jasmine a mocking glance, then nodded in agreement, her lips curling with thinly veiled disdain. A hush fell over first class. Some older passengers turned their heads, their eyes a mix of curiosity and tacit acceptance of the unspoken rules of long-standing privilege. Jasmine tightened her grip on the edge of her tablet, acutely aware of every sideways glance and whispered comment, but she held her head high, her eyes steady, and gently slipped the contract back into her leather portfolio. She'd grown used to these looks, used to powerful people sizing her up, doubting her, trying to push her out of the game. Today, though, fear was nowhere to be found. Only one thought remained. Don't let anyone take the place you've earned. Just then, Evelyn turned fully toward Jasmine, ready to ignite a silent battle of prejudice, power, and simmering challenge that would define this fateful flight. The moment the undercurrent of tension was ignited but not yet dissipated, Jasmine saw Evelyn stride over to seat 1A, as if she owned every inch of this cabin. Without a hint of hesitation, Evelyn stopped directly in front of Jasmine, standing tall, shoulders back, and deliberately looking down on her. Evelyn's gaze swept over Jasmine's simple suit, the neat little carry-on at her feet, her well-coiffed curls, and that youthful, confident face of a young black woman occupying 1A. In that look was everything: doubt, coldness, contempt, but above all, outright refusal to accept Jasmine's presence. To Evelyn, Jasmine in 1A was a mistake that needed correcting immediately. Evelyn leaned in and whispered to Linda, loud enough for Jasmine and the two nearest passengers to hear. They must have messed up. There's no way a black girl gets 1A. This airline's really gone downhill, privileges mean nothing anymore. Linda said nothing, merely offering a tight little smile and a nod that spoke volumes. She's not wrong. First class went oddly quiet. Behind dark sunglasses, an older gentleman observed discreetly, shook his head, then looked away. A middle-aged woman on the other side silently inched her Louis Vuitton bag closer to her lap, as if worried Jasmine's mere presence might devalue the space. But Jasmine remained composed. She sat upright, met Evelyn's stare calmly, neither flinching nor challenging, radiating the confidence of someone who knows her own worth. A flicker of irritation passed through her, then gave way to a familiar feeling. That same steeliness she'd cultivated through countless childhood slights and early career rejections. Seeing Jasmine's steady calm, Evelyn's irritation only deepened. She took another step forward, loomed right at the edge of 1A, her eyes shifting from icy to imposing. As if speaking to an underling, she addressed Jasmine in a measured yet frigid tone. "I'm sorry, but you're in the wrong seat. This 1A belongs to me. I'm a Platinum Elite member, and I booked this seat weeks ago." Linda folded her arms against the headrest behind her, offering a small, mocking smile as backup. The entire cabin fell into an almost palpable hush, with only the hum of the engines and the pounding of Jasmine's heart breaking the silence. Jasmine replied, her voice soft but unwavering, her eyes locked on Evelyn's. "I don't believe there's been a mistake. I reserved this seat, and here's my boarding pass. I can show it to you." Evelyn's face flickered with surprise, but she stood her ground, her coldness now blended with a biting impatience. "Systems can glitch, you know. Don't you think you should consider moving somewhere more appropriate? You're young. You'll be fine anywhere. I've always sat in 1A on every flight." With each word, each raised brow and forced smile, Evelyn embodied everything Jasmine knew all too well. Long-held privilege, the arrogance of entitlement, and the belief that this world is only for people like me. To Evelyn, everything must follow her unspoken rules. And here was Jasmine, a young, successful black woman, shattering them. Jasmine's lips curled into a slow, calm smile, equal parts irony and resolve, ready for whatever storm lay ahead. She knew this moment was only the beginning of a far larger battle over worth, prejudice, and pride, not just her own, but that of an entire new generation. And it all started with one look, a look of prejudice, smoldering like embers just waiting to ignite into a full-blown storm. The moment Evelyn pressed herself up against the edge of the seat, the charged silence in first class felt almost tangible. The steady drone of the engines was swallowed by a different kind of quiet, the kind that lets you hear the racing hearts of young people who constantly face challenges from entrenched power. Evelyn wasted no time staking her claim. She leaned in toward Jasmine, dropping her voice as if confiding, but with unmistakable condescension. "Excuse me, I believe this is my seat. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" She stretched out the word "you," speaking like a stern elder correcting a child's mistake. Though her tone sounded courteous on the surface, her eyes and the cold crease between her brows made it clear she intended to straighten Jasmine out. Jasmine refused to go on the defensive. She calmly produced her boarding pass, seat 1A printed bold, and offered a light, determined smile. "No, ma'am, this is the seat I reserved. Here's my pass. If you'd like, I can show it to the flight attendant." Evelyn glanced at the pass, but ignored the details. Her only goal was to reassert her privilege. Her thin lips tightened into a line as she turned to Linda and complained under her breath. Then back to Jasmine, enunciating each word. "I'm a Platinum Elite member, you know. I always sit in 1A on these flights. Are you really in the right place here?" Her expression shifted from doubt to attack. A ripple of curiosity and unease swept the cabin. Passengers who'd been absorbed in newspapers, phones, or glasses of wine all looked up, their faces a mix of interest and indifference, as though they were waiting for a show. Linda Miller, arms folded, leaning casually against the seat behind Evelyn, met Jasmine's eyes, then Evelyn's, her expression siding wholly with her privileged friend. Behind them, a timid, elderly gentleman leaned toward his wife and murmured, "This was bound to happen sooner or later. They just don't get the unspoken rules in this cabin." Jasmine felt the chill in the air. This was more than a dispute over a seat. It was a challenge to an entire value system. Evelyn wasn't asking for clarification. She was trying to force Jasmine out of the safe zone of her generation, to make her feel like an intruder. But Jasmine did not flinch. She steadied her voice, looked Evelyn squarely in the eye, and, drawing on the resilience forged through countless slights, replied with unwavering confidence, "I'm absolutely certain, ma'am. The pass is correct and the seat is confirmed. If there's any question about the reservation system, we can ask the flight attendant to verify it again." Her words weren't loud, but they were clear enough for nearby passengers to hear her firm resolve. Evelyn recognized that resolve, and her irritation deepened. Her gaze sharp as a pin, gold-ringed fingers clutching her handbag strap, nails tapping the leather as if to vent her frustration. Leaning in, Linda murmured, "Maybe you should just be flexible to avoid trouble. It'll go more smoothly next time. This is hardly unusual." Jasmine turned to her with a faint, unyielding smile. "I believe fairness isn't a matter of flexibility, and a seat isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn." The atmosphere in first class grew even denser, not just because of their words, but because, for the first time, a long-standing Platinum member's privilege was being challenged by a young black woman wielding nothing but courage and self-respect that money or tenure couldn't buy. This first collision had ignited a tense showdown where every glance, every word, every forced smile was a cut into the illusion of serenity upheld by the elite. The charged tension between Jasmine and Evelyn hadn't even begun to dissipate when lead flight attendant Greg Parker appeared, and every head in first class turned to seat 1A. Greg, a veteran in his 30s with that familiar, courteous smile, was known for handling delicate situations with finesse. Today, though, his usually neutral demeanor couldn't conceal the hesitation in his eyes. He leaned down, doing his best to stay professional, though his voice betrayed a hint of unease. "Excuse me, ma'am. May I just verify your boarding pass, just to be sure? I hope you don't mind." Jasmine remained perfectly calm, handing him the pass with Seat 1A clearly printed, along with the booking date and payment details. Her gaze never left his, silently signaling, "I have nothing to hide, and I know I'm in the right." Greg studied the pass, then, rather than immediately confirming, he asked again, puzzled, "Are you absolutely certain this is your reservation? When did you make it?" Jasmine kept her polite smile, her voice steady. "Yes, I booked and paid for this seat over a month ago. If you'd like, I can show you the email confirmation as well." Before Greg could respond, Evelyn cut in sharply, her tone like a blade. "Greg, you know I'm one of this airline's most loyal customers. You know I always sit in 1A, right? There must be some mix-up. Can you please fix this for me?" Evelyn's eyes pleaded and imposed at once, as if her long-standing status automatically guaranteed she'd get her way. Greg looked momentarily flustered. He glanced around first class, then exchanged a look with the flight manager, Deborah Lane, the steely-eyed woman in her 40s known for never compromising. Deborah, seated a few rows back, had observed everything from the start, but hadn't intervened. Greg gave her a subtle nod, clearly seeking guidance, knowing this situation was far from routine. An undercurrent of pressure swept the cabin. Evelyn turned to the other passengers and spoke loudly. "I just don't understand. Has this airline really gotten to the point where anyone can take a loyal customer's seat?" Linda Miller pressed her lips together sympathetically, then cast a curious, expectant glance at Jasmine, waiting to see whether the young woman would be reasonable and yield. A few other passengers began to murmur, eyes filled with judgment, as if they were waiting to see Jasmine quietly step aside and restore the cabin's proper order. But Jasmine did not falter. She met Greg's eyes and spoke gently but firmly. "I've provided every valid document. If you need more time to verify, I'm happy to wait, but I will not leave this seat simply because someone else feels entitled." In another corner, Deborah Lane clenched her clipboard, her eyes flashing with calculation, aware that a single decision in first class could spark an uproar back at corporate headquarters. And while that delicate balance hung unresolved, Jasmine found herself isolated in the minority, facing every subtle demand for submission, yet drawing on the strength and resolve every stage of her young life had taught her to withstand. The charged atmosphere from Jasmine and Evelyn's confrontation hadn't even begun to subside when lead flight attendant Greg Parker's arrival drew every eye in first class back to seat 1A. Greg, a veteran in his 30s with a courteous, practiced smile, was known for handling delicate situations with finesse, but today his usual neutrality couldn't hide the hesitation in his gaze. The tense stillness in the cabin thickened, feeling almost suffocating. Low murmurs rose like small waves, seeping through each row of leather seats. A middle-aged man craned his neck to look at Jasmine, exhaled and shrugged, as though to say, "Don't make a scene." Across the aisle, a woman in a Chanel jacket shook her head silently, her judgmental stare sweeping past Jasmine as if she were an unwelcome anomaly. At the back of the cabin, an elderly couple whispered to one another, their voices low but carrying clearly. "Too young and inexperienced, she doesn't know her place." Every glance, every sideways look, every shake of the head, every whispered comment. It was as if invisible needles were pointed at Jasmine, turning her into the focal point of subtle disdain, skepticism, and polite contempt from a class defined by age, status, and privilege. In that moment, Jasmine felt as though she'd been transported back to her earliest days in the corporate world. A young woman of color constantly put to the test, expected to know her place. Finally, Linda Miller, Evelyn's ever-faithful confidant, spoke up. Her tone was sweet, but layered with that patronizing, wise elder advice. "You're so young and just getting started. I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunities to sit in first class down the road. Evelyn's used to this seat. Why not let her have it this time? Sometimes stepping aside makes things easier for everyone, dear." Though Linda's voice was quiet, her words landed like a verdict. This wasn't mere advice. It was the unspoken social norm of this cabin. The young, especially those who stand out, must yield to those who came before, those deemed more deserving of respect. Around them, other passengers, unwilling to get directly involved, quietly signaled their agreement. A few nodded, others clicked their tongues, or pretended to scroll through their phones while casting judgmental glances at Jasmine. The result was enormous pressure, squeezing the small bubble of personal space she'd carved out. Despite the injustice welling inside her, Jasmine refused to back down. She drew a deep breath, lifted her chin and met Linda's gaze, then flitted a look toward Evelyn. Her eyes no longer merely defensive, they shone with the pride of a new generation. "I understand what you all think, but if everyone yields to prejudice, fairness will never exist. Evelyn has no right to take my seat just because I'm young or different." Jasmine's voice wasn't loud, yet it rang out across the near-silent cabin, compelling every pair of ears to listen. In her eyes was more than endurance. There was a fierce light, the light of someone who refuses to be pushed aside by age, skin color, or the biases of the majority. Linda paused, taken aback by Jasmine's candor. Evelyn's displeasure deepened. She pressed her lips together and gripped her bag's strap so tightly her knuckles whitened, her surprise laced with anger. She was accustomed to people knowing better and stepping aside whenever she spoke. But the crowd's pressure did not break Jasmine. Instead, it forged her resolve. A resolve hammered out against the anvil of prejudice, now shining brightly in a space that once seemed reserved solely for old privileges. And just then, from the far end of the cabin, Flight Manager Deborah Lane stepped forward, her thoughtful gaze suggesting she was ready to resolve what seemed like a small incident, unaware that it was about to trigger a much larger upheaval. The tension in first class had reached its breaking point when, from the far end of the aisle, Flight Manager Deborah Lane appeared. Tall and lean in her crisp uniform, her face bore the calm authority of someone accustomed to defusing crises, though you could still sense her deference toward Platinum Elite passengers. She stopped in front of row 1A, shot a quick glance at Evelyn as if to acknowledge her VIP status, then turned to Jasmine. Her voice was low and measured, projecting neutrality, but every word carried the weight of institutional power. "Miss Carter, we truly want this flight to proceed smoothly and harmoniously. If you would be willing to move to seat 3C or 4A, also first class, we'd extend our sincere thanks from the airline and offer you an additional perk on your next flight. This would help everyone here have a more pleasant experience." Though caught between peer pressure and the might of airline protocol, Jasmine stood her ground. She met Deborah's eyes calmly but firmly. "I just have one question. If I were a 50-year-old white man in a suit, would you be asking me to move seats?" That question rippled through the cabin like a pebble dropped into a still pond. Passengers, pretending not to watch, suddenly stopped what they were doing. Evelyn's brow shot up in anger. Linda looked momentarily unsettled. Even Deborah paused for a heartbeat, clearly not expecting such a direct challenge in front of the entire cabin. Trying to regroup, Deborah cleared her throat and stuck to her script. "Miss Carter, I understand how you feel, but here we respect every passenger. However, you are the youngest person in this cabin, and sometimes flexibility fosters goodwill and helps maintain overall satisfaction." Her words sounded like a rational lecture, but were really an attempt to uphold a system that privileges age, status, and tenure. Jasmine's gaze remained icy and unwavering. Being flexible doesn't mean giving up my seat just because someone else is older or more senior. Fairness only exists when everyone is treated equally, regardless of age, skin color, or title. At that, Evelyn completely lost her composure. Her polite veneer dropped as she spat out, "Your generation sure doesn't respect your elders. When I was your age, I wouldn't have dared dream of sitting up here, let alone argue about it. Do you think buying a ticket is all it takes?" Her heavy words landed in dead silence. A few passengers looked away in embarrassment. Others watched Jasmine closely, waiting to see if she'd buckle under the lesson from the older crowd. Deborah's authority wavered too, and she made one last attempt at conciliation. "Miss Carter, we really don't want this tension to drag on. Please consider the harmony of the cabin." But Jasmine, steady and resolute, held both Deborah and Evelyn in her gaze as she spoke slowly and clearly. "I've been clear. I won't leave this seat nor will I compromise just to satisfy someone else's feelings. I worked harder than anyone here to earn this spot, and I won't let anyone, no matter who, take my right to it." First class fell into an almost oppressive silence, where every word felt like a weapon and every glance a hidden blade. At the center of it all, Jasmine stood unbowed, a solitary young woman daring to challenge the old order, carrying with her the hope and pride of a new generation, unwilling to stay silent in the face of injustice, no matter how politely it's disguised. The cabin fell into a heavy silence after Jasmine's declaration, so taut you could hear hearts pounding and suppressed breaths. Evelyn froze, her face a mix of shock and fury, while Deborah and Greg exchanged awkward glances, realizing that all their old psychological tactics had failed to shake this young woman. Jasmine stayed perfectly poised, briefly closing her eyes to steady herself after the intense mind game. Then she calmly pulled her phone from her jacket pocket and dialed, her fingers moving deliberately, without haste. The other passengers' expressions shifted from doubt to alertness. Rarely did anyone in first class brazenly place a destiny-deciding call like this within earshot of everyone. Before 2 rings had sounded, a deep, composed male voice answered. Marcus Reed, Jasmine's college friend, the one who told her, "If you want to change the world, you've got to stand tall and do what no one else dares." What no one in the cabin knew was that Marcus wasn't only her friend, but also a board member at SkyWest Airlines, an authority whose name alone could make senior executives nervous. Facing the entire cabin, Jasmine spoke each word crisply, as though hammering through the silence. "Hi, Marcus. I'm having an issue with discrimination and VIP privilege on Flight 307. I'd like your help to ensure transparency and fairness, not just for me, but for any young or different passenger who's ever been treated this way." Evelyn's lips trembled with anger, but for the first time she couldn't interrupt. Linda's eyes widened in confusion. Greg and Deborah looked genuinely pale. Only industry insiders knew that calling Marcus Reed meant swift, uncompromising investigations, and even firings for anyone who trampled on fairness. The plane was silent. Even the automated weather update over the PA felt distant. The entire cabin seemed frozen. Every gaze locked on Jasmine, not only because of the audacity of youth, but because she had struck at the root of the problem, the invisible bias and entitlement upheld for generations by handshakes and polite assurances. On the other end of the line, Marcus didn't need more details. His voice was surprisingly cool and firm. "Jasmine, stay right where you are. I'll handle this personally, and no one will be treated unfairly on this flight. I'll also report it immediately to the CEO and board." Jasmine closed her phone with a slight smile, feeling empowered. She looked around the cabin, eyes steady and edged with challenge. She wasn't shouting or begging. She was simply doing what was right, and that quiet, logical defiance stunned everyone. A new generation protest that demanded transparency and justice. Evelyn gripped her handbag strap so tightly her knuckles whitened, her gaze burning into Jasmine with barely concealed rage. Her invisible authority fractured, unable to intimidate someone who no longer feared it, and powerless against a system shifting thanks to people like Jasmine and Marcus. Deborah looked on with a mix of embarrassment and unease. She knew that a single call could imperil both her and Greg's careers. Yet, she also recognized the real power of youthful resolve, a power that needed no shouting, no decades-long connections, only righteousness and steadfastness. When Jasmine sat back, arms folded on the seatback and eyes turned toward the window, first class entered a new kind of silence, not the hush of old guard privilege, but the tense anticipation of an ending in which every familiar rule could be upended at any moment. The moment the call ended, the silence in first class grew even more suffocating. Jasmine sat quietly, her gaze calm as she stared out the window, though inside her a gentle wave of confidence was rising. On the other end of the line, Marcus didn't waste a second. He'd already opened his laptop back at SkyWest's headquarters and was typing out an urgent email straight to the CEO and the board of directors. "Jasmine, stay right where you are. I'm contacting the CEO directly. No one will dare violate fair play on this flight." His voice was firm and cool, the unmistakable tone of someone used to handling high-level crises. To Jasmine, and to everyone watching, it was a promise. The truth would come out, and any injustice would have its consequences. Meanwhile, behind the curtain separating first class from the galley, Greg and Deborah huddled together in the cramped service area. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to be overheard. "This is totally out of control, Deborah," Greg whispered, gripping the edge of the stainless steel counter, sweat beading on his forehead. "Who does she think she is, calling the board of directors? Not everyone can pull that off." Deborah crossed her arms, her usually icy eyes now shadowed with worry. "Are you sure she actually knows someone up there? People bluff like this all the time. We just have to stick to our guns and not give her an opening." Greg shook his head, his voice dropping even lower. "I don't know, Deborah. But look at how this is playing out. I've never seen anyone her age stay so calm under that kind of pressure. Marcus Reed isn't a nobody. Anyone at SkyWest who's been around knows his name. If the board actually steps in, can we save our careers?" Deborah pressed her lips together and stared past the galley door into the cabin, a boundary between the old privileges on one side and the new challenges on the other. Out in first class, Evelyn sat rigidly in 1B, her face cold, but her lips clamped tight with rage. Linda fidgeted, glancing back toward the galley as if waiting for the crew to make their move. A soft chime from the PA announced a delay for a technical inspection. A vague message, but enough to make the waiting even more tense. For minutes that felt like hours. Everyone in first class stayed frozen. No one spoke, no one dared break the silence. Behind Jasmine's composed exterior burned a quiet fire. The fire of faith in fairness and unyielding resolve. And in the crew quarters, anxiety was spreading too. Because once that spark reached corporate HQ, there was no avoiding a full review of every decision they'd made. In that moment, this massive aircraft had become a stage for high drama. One bold act by a young woman was enough to shake the foundations of an entire aging system, from the cockpit all the way to the boardroom. Minutes of heavy waiting passed, with every eye still stealing glances toward Jasmine in seat 1A, when two figures appeared at the cabin door, impossible to mistake. Both wearing dark navy suits, silver name badges glinting. Their sudden, precise entrance silenced every sound. Crew and passengers alike froze, the air thickening. Brian Foster, the Eastern Region Operations Director for SkyWest Airlines, stepped forward, his face stern, eyes sharp and cold, bearing unwavering resolve. At his side was Samantha Collins, Service Quality Control Manager. Petite but purposeful, her gaze as keen as a blade. Brian halted mid-aisle and swept his eyes across the cabin, sizing up the situation in an instant. Without a word of preamble, his deep voice rang out clearly. "Lead Flight Attendant Greg Parker and Flight Manager Deborah Lane, please follow us to the conference room for a private briefing." His tone held the weight of a direct summons, and both Greg and Deborah froze. Greg's usual confidence drained from his face. Deborah squared her shoulders, but her eyes betrayed real concern. They rose silently and followed the two senior representatives out, the soft click of the door closing behind them echoing like a transfer of power. Inside the cabin, Evelyn Stokes's privileged composure crumbled for the first time. She leaned toward Linda and whispered anxiously, her lower lip trembling. They actually brought in corporate? This must be serious. Linda, usually so sharp and controlled, clutched her purse strap, her eyes drifting toward the rear rows, unable to speak. Jasmine remained seated in 1A, one hand resting lightly on her thigh, outwardly calm, yet her eyes shone with an unspoken light, the light of conviction and quiet triumph. Once the lone minority, she now witnessed an undercurrent shift. A system long propping up entrenched privilege was beginning to tip toward justice and equality. The cabin's atmosphere shifted from grim tension to vigilant anticipation. Everyone understood. The arrival of corporate reps meant the matter had escalated beyond the crew's authority. Behind that closed conference room door, a high-stakes discussion was underway. Every action, every word, every scrutinizing glance, every silent pressure point would be dissected. In Jasmine's mind, years of prejudice, trials, and condescension flashed by like a film reel. And now she herself compelled the system to face a truth. Fairness is not just lip service, but a principle that must be upheld. Outside, the passengers remained motionless, none daring to speak, each sensing a new power dynamic as truth emerged, and every antagonist was forced to confront the real consequences of their choices. And first class, once thought an impenetrable fortress of long-held privilege, now trembled at its very foundation. After nearly half an hour of tense waiting, the door to the private meeting room at the rear of first class swung open. Brian Foster and Samantha Collins stepped out, their faces stern and unyielding. Right behind them came Deborah Lane and Greg Parker, two figures now completely bereft of their usual confidence and authority, their every step heavy with stress and shock. Brian paused in the center aisle, his gaze sweeping over the entire flight crew before turning to all the passengers. He spoke without preamble or concealment. This was a moment of transparency, and he knew he answered not only to his crew, but to the airline's top leadership. On behalf of SkyWest Airlines, I hereby announce to the crew and our esteemed passengers, any act of favoritism, undue pressure, suspicion, or unfair treatment toward younger customers, customers of color, or anyone else for personal reasons is a serious violation of our company's policies and ethics. Effective immediately, Deborah Lane and Greg Parker are suspended from all duties on every flight pending the outcome of our internal disciplinary investigation. Security personnel will escort them off this aircraft at once. Those words were more than a verdict. They were a clarion call shattering the old belief that personal power or long-standing privilege could eclipse fairness and justice. Deborah sagged as if the air had been sucked from her lungs, her face ashen. Her once stern lips now trembled, her eyes fixed on the cabin floor, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Greg Parker turned pale, muttered a barely audible apology, and followed the security officers away. First class fell into a hush of stunned disbelief. Some passengers were awestruck, some were gobsmacked, and many looked at Jasmine with a newfound mix of respect and awakening. Evelyn Stokes, for the first time, sat upright with no trace of her usual entitlement. She clasped her purse strap so tightly her knuckles turned white, her face frozen in silent dread, fearing that, for the first time in her life, her privilege might not shield her. Linda Miller hung her head, avoiding every glance. Her usual sharpness was replaced by quiet disappointment, as if she'd realized too late that she'd been on the wrong side of history. Jasmine didn't break into a triumphant smile. She merely sat still, her eyes fixed straight ahead, while a swell of emotion rose within. Pride, not in revenge, but in the silent strength that had forced an entire system to change through unwavering resolve. Brian Foster glanced at Jasmine and offered a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement that she was no longer alone in this fight. Samantha Collins then turned to the passengers and spoke softly. "We will immediately bring in a replacement crew. Rest assured, all services and privileges will be fully honored." And as Deborah and Greg were escorted off under security's watch, the first-class cabin, once an impregnable fortress of old-school privilege, felt, for the first time in years, like it was being liberated, making way for a new atmosphere where fairness was no longer mere rhetoric but real, living practice. The charged atmosphere in first class was still reverberating from Brian's verdict against Deborah and Greg when Evelyn Stokes suddenly sprang to her feet, unable to contain herself another second. Her face flushed, eyes blazing, her whole body shaking with rage. Her voice rang out through the cabin, stripped of any composure or aristocratic grace. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. I've flown with this airline for over 20 years. Who do you think you are, humiliating me like this? I'll sue every one of you. Some brat like her calling board members? Ridiculous. This world has gone mad." As she ranted, she pointed accusingly at Jasmine. Passengers around her recoiled. Some averted their eyes in discomfort, and those who had sided with her fell silent, unwilling to support her any more. Linda Miller's face went pale as she tugged Evelyn's arm and whispered urgently, "Evelyn, please. This has gone far enough. Sit down, please." But Evelyn brushed her off and only shouted louder, desperately clinging to her last shred of power. Unbeknownst to her, the look in everyone's eyes had shifted from respect to pity and frustration. Brian Foster's face remained ice-cold, his gaze razor-sharp. In a firm, unyielding tone, he shattered Evelyn's hopes of further protest. Disruptive behavior, public discrimination, and harassment of other passengers are grave violations of our policies. Ms. Stokes, effective immediately, your Platinum Elite status is permanently revoked. We must ask you to leave the aircraft to ensure the safety and order of this flight." The cabin fell utterly silent. Security personnel moved in swiftly and decisively. 2 officers approached Evelyn and politely but firmly asked her to stand. Linda clung to her friend, tears welling up, begging Brian, "Sir, please give her another chance. Evelyn just lost her temper." Brian would not relent. Samantha Collins stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Linda's shoulder. "Rules are rules. No one stands above them." Escorted by security, Evelyn was led out of the cabin still shouting threats of lawsuits, boasting about how much money she'd spent on the airline, railing about her honor as an American elite, and lamenting the upside-down age they now lived in. The cabin door closed behind her, its click not just ending a fit of fury, but marking the end of an era of unchecked privilege, where those accustomed to sitting above everyone else now paid the price for their arrogance. Inside first class, the initial tension dissolved into a new quiet. No one felt safe under the shadow of old power anymore. Compassionate, empathetic, even admiring looks turned to Jasmine Carter, the young woman who had stood her ground and forced truth and justice to prevail. From that moment on, every unwritten rule about privilege, age, or skin color shattered, making way for a new order where what is right, fair, and civilized is protected for everyone. The moment the cabin door clicked shut, the last echoes of that privilege-fueled storm finally faded. First class felt freshly cleansed, lighter, warmer, despite the late afternoon sun now only gilding the distant horizon. The furtive, Curious, judgmental glances from moments before had transformed into quiet looks of respect for Jasmine, the young woman who stood alone against an entrenched system and forced it to change. Nearby, a businesswoman gave an approving nod, as if saying, "Well done." An elderly couple whispered to each other, their eyes on Jasmine, filled with surprise and admiration. Sometimes a simple nod or sidelong glance said it all. That young woman accomplished what many never dared to try. Linda drew her hands together in her lap, no longer the sharp confidant at Evelyn's side. In her eyes was thoughtful reflection, a twinge of discomfort, and a muted shame in the face of Jasmine's unwavering resolve. Those who had backed Evelyn now sat silent, no one daring to defend a collapsing status quo. Samantha Collins, the petite airline representative with confident stride, approached Jasmine and bowed low, her eyes sincere. "Miss Carter, we sincerely apologize for what happened today. As a gesture of our deepest respect and gratitude, SkyWest is pleased to offer you 2 years of complimentary first-class travel. More importantly, we will completely overhaul our training programs on equality, bias prevention, and non-discrimination. This will be a new milestone for our airline and for aviation as a whole." Jasmine didn't rush to reply. She simply looked Samantha in the eye, her gaze clear and brimming with emotion and pride. Finally, she gave a gentle smile, the smile of someone who has weathered the storm, carrying the steadfast strength of youth. "Thank you for your respect and this generous offer. But what I truly hope for is that from now on, no young person, regardless of their race, background, or differences, ever has to feel isolated, suspected, or judged just for showing up in places they've worked hard to earn." Her words weren't loud, but they inspired every passenger in the cabin. They rang out as a message beyond first class, addressed to society itself. The power of young people lies not only in daring to challenge, but in choosing to fight for what's right, even when facing the scrutiny of an older generation. Samantha nodded, her eyes shining with renewed conviction. Further down the cabin, the new crew settled into place, and the flight regained its usual rhythm. Yet beneath the surface, everyone knew the order here had been irrevocably changed, and here in first class, a once impregnable fortress of privilege, today marked a quiet triumph for a new generation that stands proud and resolute, no matter what storms may come. The first-class cabin, once rocked by turmoil, had settled into a strangely deep quiet. As the engines smoothed out, a new flight attendant moved politely down the aisle, showing genuine respect to every passenger. Jasmine gently set her laptop on the tray table. Her long fingers danced over the keys, eyes fixed on the screen where the $1 million contract she'd sign upon landing glowed. It was as if she'd never been the center of a storm. Around her, everyone's attitude had shifted completely. Gone were the probing stares, whispered doubts, and chilly distance she'd faced when she first boarded. Now, only respectful, admiring looks remained. An approving nod, a friendly smile, even an odd glance. The middle-aged woman who'd earlier sneered at her now brushed Jasmine's shoulder as she passed and whispered, "You've given me a lot to rethink. I wish you all the best." Even Linda, her own heart still unsettled, looked at Jasmine with a mixture of regret, admiration, and surprise that she'd ever sided with Evelyn. Jasmine knew that true power wasn't in raising one's voice or brandishing authority before an audience. It lived in quiet resolve, in daring to say no to injustice even when alone, and in the confidence to stand up for what's right on behalf of those who can't. She understood that today she hadn't only defended her own rights. The moment she held her ground in Seat 1A, refusing to yield to outdated power or invisible rules, she opened a new door for millions of other young people to dare to dream big and believe they deserve a place anywhere in this world. In the boardroom, in first class, or at any summit they choose. Every email she now typed, every line of that contract was more than professional duty. It was a silent declaration. Success knows no skin color, no age, and isn't a gift from any privileged system. It's earned by courage, hard work, and by those bold enough to break the old molds. The flight resumed in its new, peaceful rhythm. But in the heart of first class, a fresh kind of strength had been born. Not announced with fanfare or applause, but revealed in silence, confidence, and the quiet bravery to change history, even if by just a small, powerful step. That flight ended in calm, but its aftershocks rippled far beyond that sleek Boeing and everyone on board. Within weeks, Jasmine Carter's name had outgrown tech contracts and startup circles. She became a symbol of justice, youth, and bold change in American aviation. SkyWest Airlines sent a system-wide bulletin. Its headline splashed across every meeting room and office screen. Effective immediately. All crew training on anti-discrimination and equity across race, age, and background will be completely overhauled. Crew members must now meet regular assessments using the treatment of young and diverse passengers as the new standard, replacing any outdated VIP-only priorities. Procedures to protect the rights of passengers, especially those not in traditional privilege groups, will be significantly strengthened. Any blind favoritism based on long-standing relationships, skin color, pedigree, or tenure is abolished from our first-class service policy. That announcement was more than a corporate pivot. It was a rallying cry for a society hungry for fairness. Major news outlets called it the Jasmine Carter incident, marking it as a turning point in luxury service. A young woman of color did what no one else dared. She challenged entrenched privilege, defied a system built on silence, and won. Social media exploded with millions of comments, stories of prejudice, invisible pressures, and personal struggles from young people and minorities. Hundreds of letters poured in, thanking Jasmine for inspiring them to chase dreams once stifled by skin color, gender, or being too young to be taken seriously. On a national talk show, when the host asked Jasmine how she really felt, she simply smiled with quiet grace and said, "I want to tell everyone, believe in yourself. Don't let bias, age, or skin color hold you back. True strength is refusing to bow to injustice, no matter how young you are. I don't see myself as a hero. I just did what everyone should. Hold on to your worth and stand up for what's right. If today I've inspired even one person to say no to unfairness, then I've completed the most important mission of this journey." Backstage, Marcus Reed, her trusted friend and SkyWest board member, watched with pride. Samantha Collins, the airline's quality control director, emailed Jasmine, "Because of you, service standards and ethics in aviation have changed. Thank you for teaching us. Not with speeches, but with quiet, courageous action." From that first-class cabin, Jasmine's story spread across America and beyond. It planted a simple but timeless truth in a new generation's heart. Justice, self-respect, and equality begin with individuals who dare to break old molds and trust in their own strength. One flight ended, but a new era began, and Jasmine, along with everyone ever underestimated or kept outside those privileged seats, forever redefined who deserves one A in any field of life. What do you think of Jasmine Carter's journey? If you were in her shoes, how would you face injustice, bias, or old guard privilege? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories and perspectives. If her story inspired you, Please like, share, and subscribe for more meaningful tales. Thank you for following and standing with us. Together, we'll keep spreading messages of fairness, pride, and the power of a new generation.